In today's video, we're going to be talking about a few methods you can use to try to minimize tear out from your bandsaw. These will go in ascending-ish order of least complicated to more complicated, but all of them are relatively simple. And I know a lot of people out there love using their bandsaw, but you often get tear out. It's almost impossible to eliminate it entirely, but there are things we can do to minimize it. So before we get into the fixes, let's just talk about what tear out is, what it looks like when I think it's pretty bad, and what I think is an acceptable level. Tear out is the sawtooth or the cutter pulling the fiber at the very end generally out. It's a little different on a router, but for saw blades of different types, it's usually when the tooth pulls out the back and it wants to yank a wood fiber or some part of the wood with it. It can especially be really bad on a bandsaw on veneered plywood. It can be bad on certain woods. Oak can be pretty bad at times, and other woods are just really prone to tear out. Cherry is not a great one. So if we look closely here, this is pretty bad tear out. This entire top of the veneer here has been just yanked out. We've got a lot of it coming out here. You can see that there. And this would be a bit problematic if you don't have a lot of room to sand away. Now on this piece of oak here, which I find to be a relatively tear out prone wood, we can see we've really minimized this using some of the methods I will show in the video going forward. I would consider this to be an acceptable amount with just a few little fibers hanging over the edge there. That can easily be cleaned up even just with a couple finger rubs. Now, these were both using a 6 tooth per inch bandsaw blade, so a general purpose blade. I'll talk a little bit about how different blades will produce more or less tear out, but just for the sake of looking at this tear out, these were both cut with 6 teeth per inch blades. Number one is pretty basic. A blade that is sharp and has more teeth will lead to less tear out. Now, for the sake of this video, I understand that most people don't have a lot of blades, and they may not have specialty blades. So we're gonna work with just a 6 tooth per inch, 1/4 inch blade, a very common general purpose blade for benchtop bandsaws, but very prone to tear out on certain woods. So our methods here will be about avoiding tear out using this general purpose type blade. But I just want to get out of the way that the first thing you should do if you're having a ton of problems and you're needing to cut a lot of things that cannot have tear out, start with buying a higher tooth, sharper blade and saving it only for the occasions where you cannot have tear out if possible. Our second method is going to be making our own zero clearance inserts. Your bandsaw will have come with a factory insert, and over time these get chewed up for a variety of reasons. As you can see, the original one on mine is a total wreck. Now, for the Raycon bandsaw specifically, hardboard that you can find at home centers is nearly the perfect size thickness-wise to fit into this. A little finesse sanding and it sits in really nicely. Now this is what it looks more like in its raw form. It comes in relatively large sheets, but it's really cheap. And I like to have it around for a variety of things, but I found that it is the essentially perfect thickness for this. So the first thing to do, and this is kind of a thing to just do over time anyways, is to make your own inserts for these, and then we can cut them with the blade to try to make them as zero insert clearance as possible. One downside of doing this is that the less open room here you have, the more dust is going to build up on your table. Just like with a table saw, the closer to zero clearance insert, anything that's going outside and not being pulled directly down by the teeth will get on the table. So let's go over and make one of these really quick. As you can see, I've already got one in there, but when I was making this and experimenting, I didn't make more than one at the same time, so I really want to make a few more right now. So like I said, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to cut these out. All right, I just want to point out ahead of time that this is the edge profile we're going to be looking for when we sand. We want a slight taper. This is a bit exaggerated going down to make it easier to get in, and then just a very slight taper at the top as well to make it easier to get out. This one much smaller than this one, but if you look at the default on most of them that come with your bandsaw, they taper down. It's very hard to get them out without shoving up hard from the bottom if it's straight up and down. Now, as I said before, we need to do the shaping of this. If you have a disc sander, belt sander, you're just going to do this on there. I don't have one, so I built this little thing that holds my random orbit sander. I'm going quite aggressive. This stuff does not sand super easily, so I'm all the way down on 60 grit. As long as you keep the top nice and smooth, you're fine. We're going to put some wax on this at the end. Feel free to, go at this and it's rough. And just start by removing the line, because since we're tracing the outside, that means everything inside of the line is what we're looking for. So remove the line, then put a slight taper on it, and then check the fit. We'd rather sneak up slowly on this than overshoot, because if we overshoot, it's a no-go. All right, so we're going to start there, and we're going to go do a test fit now. You're going to have to remove your blade for the test fit, because we're not going to cut the slot for the blade until after, so take your blade off when you go over there. Okay, and this is the fit we are looking for. We can just press it down in there, and it's not going to move at all. It's not going to rotate, but a nice, modest little push will bring it out. We don't want to have to shove it out. We just want to have to press it in. Now, depending upon the height of your table, you may need to flip this over and remove some height from this. This is just a hair above. So I'm going to go remove a little, and then like I said, we're just going to gently taper the top a little bit. But be careful at this point. You don't want to go too far below the table, or when you're pushing pieces through, they get caught up on the back edge or whatever edge you're going towards. So take this slowly. You're really close at this point. Now that we've got the fit, we're going to do the cut to make the opening. Now you'll need to decide ahead of time whether you want the opening in front or the back, because the blade is not exactly evenly spaced from the back as it is to the front. There is a slightly longer distance from the back, so you'd have to be cutting a longer channel if you want to insert it from the back. So when we put the blade on, you can do some rough measurements. I normally just put mine in the front. I don't know if it matters at all, but if you're doing mostly stuff in the front and not through cutting, you may want this to be closed up here. So let's line that up and cut it now. And one other thing I wanted to mention, if you've only made one of these and you've overshot it, you can grab some blue tape, some packing tape, some duct tape, however far you've overshot it, and stick it to the bottom or stick it to the sides of this to make it a tighter fit. Like I said, it's nice to make more than one of these at a time, but if you're running out of time or you don't have more of this material, tape of different thicknesses can kind of shim it into place. Now, to make this cut, we really want to do this as straight as possible, since we want this to be a zero clearance. Obviously, turning off the bandsaw, sometimes you get a bit of a flutter, so it's just going to get chewed up a bit, but I highly suggest putting a straight line down the middle of this that you're going to attempt to follow. Now, I do not personally try to make this in exactly one attempt, because I'd rather undershoot and have to nibble a little bit more than to overshoot and have a larger gap. Now, from looking at this, we can get a rough idea of where we're going to have to go. Now, I'm putting mine in from the front, of course, so I'm going to need to line up roughly there, and it will be to about here, carry that across. So I'm going to need to go about 1 1/8 inches, give or take. And we'll start at that, and we will then nibble away more if we need to from there. Okay, we'll pop out the old one and give this one a test. That is basically dead on the money. So if you have the Rikon 3061, you're looking about 1/8 and an inch and 1/8 if you want to have it in the front. In the back, you're going to need... Boy, you're going to need probably 1 3/8 inches, I would guess, but measure that yourself. So I'm going in the front here. Now, like I said, when you turn bandsaws on and off, when you change the blade, sometimes there's a little flutter at first. So this is going to get a little chewed up just inherently. But if you're doing a project and you can't afford to have any tear out, especially on the early cuts, make a fresh one of these and go with that. Now, a few other options are, if you are going to have one that's just general purpose, and to improve dust collection, you can drill a bunch of holes in this. I haven't done too much experimenting with that, but I know a lot of companies sell aftermarket ones with holes in it. So I think that's something interesting to try. I'm going to make one specifically for resawing, which produces a ton of dust, and I'm going to put quite a few holes in that, because oftentimes I just take it out entirely if the board is large enough. If you want, you can go ahead and apply some paste wax to this as well. As you can see, mine got a little scraped up during sanding, but the top side of this is actually quite smooth. But paste wax always helps make things smooth in general. So that's our second method, making a zero clearance custom insert, and we're going to move on to the next method now. This may be all you need. You can stop here if you want, if it's working for you, and if it is, that's awesome. Okay, the next option is sort of an extension and an increase in size from the zero clearance insert, and that's to make essentially a zero clearance tabletop. Now, you would do this as part of wanting to make a bigger tabletop in general. So if you want to expand the size of the table, this is a really good option. Now, I only have enough hardboard on hand to do it with this size. I would make it out of 1/4 inch MDF probably. And what you need to do really is put a bunch of magnets into the bottom of this, because if you need to hold with clamps, you're limiting your table size to where the clamps can clip. So I've taken this, which was the biggest piece of hardboard I had, and I've essentially laid in there, or hot glue gunned in there, I should say, magnets, cut a single strip down, and then we've essentially got a zero clearance tabletop. But don't do this unless you're also extending your table, because there's no real advantage over the zero clearance insert unless you're just trying to make a bigger table too. I'll go show you how to put this on and how it fits while we're here. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. I've got my magnets, and you just slide this on there. You have to hold it off of the table until you're all the way back, obviously, as the magnets will pull down. And you've got it there. It stays on. It's not going anywhere. And, you know, I've gained a little bit of width here, but you could gain quite a bit. And if you use 1/4 inch MDF, even 1/2 inch, you're going to have a lot of solidity as long as you've got enough magnets on there. The only thing you're going to lose a lot of is dust collection. You are only going to get the dust that stays within the teeth going down there, and you will pile up a bunch of dust on the top. So this is kind of for, you know, two parts, extending your table and the zero clearance. It doesn't offer a whole lot of zero clearance additive over just the zero clearance insert. So not just for tear out, for widening a table as well. The next option is a bit of a limited use case, but if you know the shape is able to be copied directly onto both sides, pre-scoring will help. As with pre-scoring any saw cut, if you sever the top fibers, they will not be able to be ripped out in most cases. So if you're cutting out a shape that has relatively straight lines, any kind of knife, marking gauge can do a really good job. If you're doing a rip and you want to just pre-score that line, that will work as well. Like I said, this is pretty limited in its use case because we're often drawing a somewhat intricate curved shape on the top, and attempting to copy that to the other side at exactly the right spot is going to be very hard. But for any kind of straight lines or square cuts, this can work really well. What I would consider to be the first of two of the nuclear options would be blue tape. And this would involve essentially covering the entire area that your cut marks are going to be. This works really well, but I call this the nuclear option, or one of two, because it's expensive. It's a disposable, consumable item. You're going to have to do it every time. It's not something that you can save and reuse. But if you cover the entire back in blue tape and you're using a relatively sharp blade, even if it's a 6 tooth per inch, you will get pretty limited tear out. Now, it will clog up the teeth of your bandsaw a bit, so after a while, if you're doing a ton of cutting, you may have to take the blade out and scrub it a little bit, because the tape can, much like on a table saw, get caught in the teeth. But if you are cutting a piece of wood and none of the other options have worked, and you just cannot afford to have more tear out, blue tape is the next option. The final option, the double nuclear option, the hydrogen bomb to atomic bomb option, is a full-on backer board. So some kind of material that's going to be affixed under your cut and will be on there for the entire cut, and will obviously get cut out in the same shape. Now, when I have logs thicker than I need, lumber thicker than I need, I often use the bandsaw to cut off what I don't need instead of planing it all the way down to save wear and tear on my planer blades. This leaves me with a bunch of nice pieces of too thick to be veneers, but you know, I don't often know what to do with them. And in the few rare occasions where I was having problems with tear out on certain woods before I started some of the other methods, I would take these thick veneerish kind of pieces and I would quite literally just hot glue gun this on there and cut it. Obviously, this is even more of a consumable than the blue tape option, and the price will go up. But much like with replaceable zero clearance fences on miter sleds, crosscut sleds, when you replace the back and only the saw blade goes through, you've essentially created a same kind of backer board issue, except with a bandsaw, it's going to be the first cut every time. So this is your final option because it's not going to be cheap over time. But if you do save scraps of, 1/4-inch ply or that hardboard, very good option, very cheap, good option, you can hot glue, double stick tape, whatever, onto the piece and then go through and cut out. Now, obviously make sure that whatever you're cutting out has the, your bandsaw has the power to go through even more and more wood. For most people, that shouldn't be an issue if you're just doing 3/4 lumber and then a backer board. But that's our final nuclear option. I just want to thank you for watching, and I hope one or more of these methods combined has been able to help you deal with tear out. If you have any questions or any other suggestions of ways to deal with tear out on the bandsaw, throw them in the comments. Thanks again, and have a good one.